Welcome back. Welcome to this session about sharing the experience. It will be a session about discussing the keys to success for collaboration between pharma and startups. This is a topic that is very dear to our hearts here at Basel Area Business and Innovation. Maybe I'll tell you a quick anecdote to see why. Right? I think it's 2 years ago our CEO came to us, Christoph Klopper came to us and said, well, I just had this great discussion at Novartis. And they told us, do you want to take up space in the middle of the Novartis campus to animate startups? And I proposed digital health startups as part of the opening of the Novartis campus to the public. We said, wow, that sounds good. How much? 500 square meters to start with. Then we started to worry, as in 500 square meters, how will we fill this, right? 500 square meters with digital health startups here in Basel. Let's get to work, right? And there was no reason at all to worry. 1 year later, we were fully booked. We have 25 plus leading edge digital health startups on campus. And the place is being expanded as we speak. We doubled the space to 1,000 square meters. So I think this story shows the appetite there is, both from pharma, but also from startups to engage and to collaborate in something that should be actually a no-brainer, right? There is a huge win-win-win situation between a startup and big pharma. Big pharma having an incredible knowledge about the clinical part of the equation, have an incredible commercial clout. We don't have to forget, I mean, healthcare is always local and pharma is mostly global. What's best than a route to market than to partner with a big pharma company? And then for big pharma, it's really about diversifying themselves, moving outside of their traditional core business, which they need to do, collaborating with digital health companies, getting closer to patients, simplifying processes. And it's a no-brainer for healthcare overall, because all these will improve healthcare. And for us, as a region, it's a no-brainer either, because we have the opportunity in this region, in Switzerland, in Europe, really to create an ecosystem that is active between big pharma and startups. But for all of us who have worked at this interface, we know it's hard. We have all bled at the interface between big pharma and startups, and probably because there is no playbook today, right? There is no playbook about how does this work. We are writing the playbook now as we speak, and we are building the plane as we are flying. And that's a little bit, I would say, the topic of this panel. I have the best group of panel I could imagine, right, to write such a playbook. And maybe we would have started with a chapter about, of course, patient centricity with Steve Bork. But the second chapter would be about relationship between pharma companies and startups. And we will then later start with Belinda from Roche, Rare Diseases, in a fantastic partnership with Digital Companion, represented by Hannes here out of Heidelberg. And then one day you have to start, right, this relationship. How do you do this with Karsten, having just moved to Basel with his company, right, a subsidiary here on campus, your experience working with big pharma. And what does then big pharma do? And we'll have the great opportunity to listen to Vensi, how it activated the digital health ecosystem in Bulgaria. And then we'll hear from a bigger startup, right, Aukin. You guys have multiple relationships with many pharma companies. We'll hear how you do that. And then we'll have two questions, maybe more business related, and that's why we have Ardi in front of you, in front of us, here from Sexter, fascinating company where we talk about business models, right? B2C2B, B2B2C, we'll talk with him about that, and then we'll end, and this is very important, with Eider. We hear from Ferring, two hats on. Ferring was also an investor, talking about investability of startups at the interface with big pharma. So that would be, for me, the perfect playbook, if we could write it now. And I'll start now with Belinda, maybe to hear how the relationship with Digital Companion started and what worked and maybe what could be improved.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and also with my partner in crime, Hannes, here from DHC. I think before I'm going to share some of the learnings, that we had throughout our collaboration, I would like to provide some context, right? In what area are we collaborating? We're collaborating in a disease that is called spinal muscular atrophy. So it's a rare genetic neuromuscular disorder. It affects children and it affects adults. And I think that's important to know, we're working together in a rare disease community. I think there are 3 points that I would like to share with you today, which I think are crucial or were crucial in terms of collaboration. And the first one I'm going to start with is a shared vision, right? Shared ambitions and shared visions. This is truly, when I met Hannes and his team, in Heidelberg, being physicians, being startup founders for the first time, it was really about there is a match, right? We want to achieve the same for patients. We want to achieve that we transform care. And the way we want to do this is, by working on digital health solutions for patients with neuromuscular disorders. In this specific case, it's an integrated care solution for patients with SMA, but also for others in the future. And the reason why we worked on this together, why we want to work on this together, is because we learned from the community itself, from people with SMA, from caregivers, from families, and also from Hannes being a physician and his team, that there is such a huge pain point and such a huge need for this. So the first point really that I would like to share with you is choose your partners wisely, right? The road is really rocky. You need to have partners who want to fight this fight together with you, basically, and have the same vision. I think the second point is about sustainability. Moving in this rare disease space, for us, both of us, I think it was very clear that we want to create a sustainable solution. Moving in a rare disease space means you don't want to create siloed, solutions and another app and another platform. We wanted to have an integrated solution for Germany as an ecosystem together with the community, and sustainable meaning, working with a partner who's neutral, who's out there in the community and who can host that platform for us. So that was extremely important when choosing this partnership. And as well, making sure that it's not just a Roche solution, right? It's not a one company approach. It's all of us together, all the stakeholders, and we're going to open this platform up to other companies, to other investors, so that everybody can come together and really build this as a community. And I think the third point is about collaboration. That's what we're talking about today, right? Collaboration, co-creation, such buzzwords in one way. Really hard to do if you have to roll up your sleeves. But I think that's where we've learned, that's what you have to excel at. It's working with people who are affected by the disease from day one. Those are the ones who actually gave us the idea of doing this. They mentioned these pain points to us. We worked with patients and caregivers really throughout every single aspect of developing this platform, not just from a conceptual perspective, but really also going through to the strategy, long-term engagement. We have patients in the steering committee. We have a person with SMA who's actually developing the UX UI of our solution. So they're team members. And I think that's another important aspect. It's not just about collaboration between the startup and the company. It's the collaboration with the entire ecosystem. You have to make sure that we're collaborating with everybody to really trigger innovation and to making sure that we have long-term sustainable solutions out there for our patients in the end. So I think with this, I would just like to say thank you for now for the collaboration so far. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's rocky sometimes. You have to change mindsets. You have to, change structures as well in the way pharma acts, right? New legal frameworks, new contract negotiations, but definitely it's worth it, and you have to have the right partners to get through, right? And I think I'm handing over to Hannes because you have the perspective from the other side.
Absolutely. Thank you, Belinda. And very nicely summed up, it's all about relationship in the collaboration. I think that's the key point for especially a very small startup that I represent today. So Digital Health Companion we only got founded, or we kicked off our business in 2021, so we're new in the game. But we have been around in academia and in digital healthcare solutions for a long time. And the main point you have to acknowledge when big pharma comes together and there is a small startup, and I think we are a real good example of that, is it is an asymmetric business relationship, right? It's highly asymmetric. And this is not meant to be understood in a way that it's a negative thing. I think it's actually a positive thing. And for it to be positive, we had a learning curve, right? We had to find out, okay, how do we as a tiny startup, how can we collaborate and actually create value with a huge pharmaceutical company. And the first learning we had, big pharma is also small, right? So in the regard, like, who do we have a relationship with? Is it Roche, or is it like a very small dedicated team within Roche? And that consists of individuals and very highly motivated people. And we've come to realize that actually our collaboration is with a handful of opinion leaders and innovative thinkers within Roche. And with those people, we had the opportunity over a long period of time, and it actually takes time, to develop a good understanding of what we want, a common mission, and on the other hand, also to develop a level of trust, right? You need trust when you are collaborating in an asymmetrical business relationship. And we have spent almost a year talking about how we are going to approach things, and I think this time was well invested, because now we know that we have someone on the other side of big pharma who really understands where we are at, we understand where Roche is at, and we can really help out when it gets bumpy, and it has been bumpy along the way. So that's number one. You need this trust, and you need a deep collaboration. If you have it as a small pharmaceutical company, we were talking about the playbook, right? There is a problem linked to that, obviously. Are your ideas, is your IP, is it protected, right? Because let's be realistic, a small startup will not wrestle a pharmaceutical company in court, right? So you need to think about upfront, is this collaboration going to be beneficial for both of us? And one of the main things we sat down in the very beginning of this collaboration, we had a long think about this, and we actually spent a lot of time thinking about it, is do we own the space we want to occupy? So the service we provide, the technical solutions we provide, do we own it in a way that they are linked to us as a company or us as individuals? And in this, the collaboration we do, basically we act as a Vimpro, a vertically integrated micro provider for patient data and services. And as such, as doctors in the community, we have one of the leading experts in SMA in the pediatric world on our team, and as a co-founder of mine. And so we have a way to actually occupy the niche that we have chosen to develop our business, and that's been really the framework or the groundwork for our collaboration. And the term we use at times, and I think it describes it very well, is some sort of radical collaboration. So you can be very close, you can actually team up and become a unit for a period of time or for a course. And that's based on a level of trust and a level of security, and that's been very productive thus far.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Belinda and Hannes. I think really a collaboration based on a common vision, mission, a lot of trust is needed, and of course the aim to build sustainable solutions and deep collaboration with patients. And I really like this question, right? Maybe an asymmetric relationship, but the team at Big Pharma might also be a very small team of very committed people for this radical collaboration. So Casper, Apsu just opened an office with us here in Basel. You do AI, you do explainable AI, you do complex stuff. And how do you engage pharma companies around this deep expertise that you have?
Yes. So first of all, what you just said, Hannes, resonates a lot with what we've learned along the way in our collaborations. Nice to hear it expressed like that. Our situation was that we had developed this fairly unique technology that can extract scientific explanations from data in a wider setting. And of course, there's a lot of places where that kind of technology can be applied, and we realized early on that one of the places where the potential to create value with a technology like that would be in the pharma life science space. So we, and I must admit, without having much knowledge of the space initially, boldly set out to explore how we could do business in this space. And after some initial successes with smaller life science companies, we started talking to bigger pharma companies, some of the biggest in the world, and we went into those talks with the mindset that we had developed this technology that could solve a lot of different problems within the scientific space. It was a little bit of an uphill battle. What happened on two specific occasions was that in our engagements with the pharma companies, we ran into people on the pharma side who could see the big picture, who could actually see that this technology could not only in general be very useful, but also had the will and the interest to help us through all the intricacies of finding a project that actually works in a pharma company. And I think a realization there is actually very much along the lines of these are a pharma company is not one big company, it's a lot of small groups, and finding your way to the 2 or 3 groups that needs to be put together so that our technology could really shine was initially it was a stroke of luck because we did run into these engaged and interested and insightful business developers on the pharma side. After that, we learned this is not really a reproducible model. You can't actually expect to always run into those kind of people, and that's why we were having less than optimal success. So we needed to learn much more about the specifics and find out what are we actually, which among those thousands of ideas that we could be good at solving is the one that we want to tackle first, and then talk about that. And forget the technology. Don't so much focus on what we can do with it, what the technology is, but what it can do. And this is perhaps a fairly trivial learning that you need to focus in on the customer's problem. But when you approach, when you have a very wide to broad technology like ours, and you approach a company of the size of these big pharma companies, then the breadth of places that it can be applied is also huge. So you need to focus. So I think the thing that I have learned is that you need to understand what you're doing and what you can help your customer. Even if it's a very big customer, you need to know which specific problem do you want to help them solve. And if I had a tip to the other side, it is if you have people who have that clear-sightedness to see the potential in new technology, then you from the pharma side can really help move these kind of collaborations along.
Thank you very much. Fantastic, right? So really focusing on the customer need, maybe forget the technology for a while, and think about the specifics. Thank you very much. We'll move towards big pharma, Novartis, with my friend Vensi, who sits on my right, who did something I think extraordinary, right, in Bulgaria, really building and activating a digital health hub. So how did you go about that?
Thank you, Frank, but honestly, I didn't do that myself, of course. I was part of this, and there were many other people who were contributing to this, so I just wanted to make this disclaimer at the end. First of all, for me, it's really honor to have, this kind of meeting here in the campus, and maybe one story, because you started with a story. Actually, when I joined the campus on 1st of May, I think Frank was one of the first people I met, because I knew before that they are here, Business Innovation, Basel Area Business Innovation Hub. And I went there and I met him, and we really had a nice conversation about the ecosystems, what is the role of such innovation hubs in order to make this collaboration between startups and pharma successful at the end. And that's why I'm here. So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really honored to be part of this panel. So I'll speak a little bit about my experience in Bulgaria, but also maybe we can reflect into how we can translate something maybe from, although it's a small country, I have to say the ecosystem is quite good and innovative. There are a lot of young and energetic people that want to do something, have great ideas. Then of course they need orchestrator, they need a platform in order to understand how to collaborate with pharma. And I think this is your role as an innovation hub, especially based here. I think you need to orchestrate it, because when I heard the other people speaking, practically these are most of the challenges that those startups are facing. And in Bulgaria, if I go back, most of those startups were quite in the early stage of development. So I guess people here are, I think they're more advanced. I mean, you can imagine there were like people just coming and saying, you know, I have this idea, I want to do something with it, but having no clue, you know, how to do that, how to cooperate with other stakeholders, and all the requirements in the whole ecosystem. So I think really, and most of the challenges are like this. For example, they're really coming to the farm office, and you see those people there just going back and forth, trying to understand who is the right person I need to address, you know, what I'm doing to show them. And they're losing a lot of precious time, I think. They can lose like weeks, even months, in order to understand who is the right business user or even business unit I need to see and present my idea. And again, I'm underlining this, but I think your role here will be really important to be able to orchestrate this. Another challenge I saw in those ecosystems is that I think the startups sometimes they don't realize that there is a huge difference in terms of speed of decision making and processes. I mean, how this is happening in the startup, how this is happening in the big pharma. And then if we don't put it like on the table, all the cards in the beginning, there are huge, you know, disappointments. The plans change, the plans don't go as planned, etc. Because we have to say it. I mean, big pharma, they have these processes. They have to comply with so many things. And the internal processes are quite big. So I think this is one learning that should be somehow, when you see such kind of startups, I think you need to pass this message to them early on, so they can plan, they can make their business plan accordingly. Because, you know, I have met some and they say, you know, after 2 months working with you on this pilot, then, you know, I'll scale up, I'll hire another people. And I said, yeah, but let's face it, we need maybe more months. Maybe we need 6, 8, 10 months for that. So another thing I think important consideration is also the product, let's say, roadmap. Because there are 2 dimensions. One is I'm doing a standard product, then I present it, and then I have, you know, partners to deal with. Or I customize it. And then I think both extremes have certain traps. Because if you have a standard product and go to big pharma, most probably they would like certain level of customization. While the other trap is if you do a lot of customization, maybe you're not able to scale up because you did it so customized that then maybe this product is not good for other, let's say, enterprises. And many other things like when to scale up, maybe they scale up too late and then they're too much dependent on one enterprise, or maybe they scale up too early. They're not prepared in terms of resources, capabilities, and there are many risks linked with that. So, and when you are part of this ecosystem, you see all of these things happening again and again. So I think here we need to understand who is the orchestrator, where is the right platform, where those learnings can come easily, not on the way, but rather up front. And I'm really happy to have you here. I think this is part of the open innovation, and I'm really happy you're here, part of the Artis campus.
Thank you very much. I'll take the part of the orchestrator that is needed, of course, but also of the roadmap that is needed, right, to make sure that the speeds are aligned between the startup and big pharma. We'll move to Cesare from Oakin. You also just opened an office in Basel, and I have to say, for the anecdote again, somebody from Roche called me and said, "Wow, you guys are so lucky. Oakin opened an office in Basel," right? Somebody called me, and as a kind of a feat. So you have a great reputation. So we know that we work with a lot of pharma companies. So how did you manage to do this, and how do you manage these relationships?
Yeah, and thanks for inviting us as well and giving us a platform to share Oakin and what Oakin does. Perhaps before I go in how we work with pharma companies, I mean, having also 20 years big pharma background, I was 17 years with Roche in the tower for many years, and 1 year AbbVie and AZ. So being very close to that, I think that was one of the important points, because a lot of you guys said we came in and we really didn't understand how it works, and it's a small, and I can only reflect what I heard from Oakin at that time. because they realize that there is a lot of teams, there is a lot of people at pharma companies they need to convince. Sometimes there is only one person that they need, but then there is teams that they really need to convince so that things can move on. So now coming back, I think one of the reason why Okin was successful is partly the trust that they were able to build. I think Hannes mentioned that, how do you build that trust relationship? And that goes only if you have projects where you really show you wanted to build something together. We have Okin, and I'm just only a couple of months now with the company. I think what they really managed well to build up consortia and prove that they can work with 10 pharma companies together. And what they showed also that the data that the companies are sharing are safe, because you mentioned IP data. Pharma companies wouldn't just give the data if they wouldn't believe that they can trust this company. And I think that's what Okin did very well in showing that the technology, the security, they're really taking it serious. And that's why the trustful relationship opened up, and now people are trusting Okin as a company where their IP is secured, where their data is secured. The second point I would say is perhaps two things. I think one is Okin was also very close to the understanding the problems. So now, Hannes, you mentioned you're a physician, if I understood correctly. So they were able at the beginning to work very closely with institutions like Gustav Husi and others to really understand what's the need that the physician and the patient have. Because once you understand that one, you can also work very closely with pharma companies and saying that, hey, this is a problem that patients and physicians are expressing. Let's work together on it because we know you have a product in that space. So I think that's the second part, to really be close to actually the customers of the pharma companies. And that's what I think Okin did very well. And the third piece is, I think, is one of the reasons why we came to Basel, or why they hired me as well here, is being close to the companies. So obviously Basel is home of companies like Roche and Novartis, but we have also Bayer and others, Actelion, J&J now here, Idorsia, a lot of big companies actually being here. But we have also, if you look at in Switzerland, you have in the French-speaking part, you will talk a little bit probably about it, we will have in Zug a lot of international companies with European hubs, where you need to be close to the customer. So you cannot manage that throughout US, or you cannot manage that throughout somewhere else. Virtually, you need to be close so that you can work every day if needed together with your customer. And I think that's kind of also the philosophy. We want to be close to our customers. So we have me here opening, hopefully growing in the future. We have also people in Boston area to be close to the companies there. We have people in UK, we have people in France. And that's, I think, the fortunate situation at the moment for us. We can be very close to the customers and work very, very closely with them. So I think these are the couple of elements that are important to be successful. And as I said, I think we're happy that we are here now and can work with companies with Roche or Novartis and others together now in the next couple of years.
Thank you very much. I think the thing you said about building trust through real projects, I think that's certainly something we need to take in this playbook, and also they need to be close, right? You need to be close to these companies to work
If I may
together.
just add, I think you mentioned that. I think if just having a technical solution and going to the pharma company saying, I have this technical solution, is not the right way. I think it's about understanding what's the pipeline, what are the issues that these companies have. And that requires also a lot of background work. You need to be close to the companies, go to congresses, talk to physicians, talk to people at the companies to understand where really the problem is. Because it's not about just a solution. And I think a lot of times small companies, they're so convinced about their product, they go, and this is the best, you have to have it. And probably that's what you mentioned before. It's not about that, it's about, does your solution help to solve a problem that your customer has? That's the only key question that you have to ask yourself. It's not about your solution.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. We'll move to Ardi, who's dialing in. I don't even know from where, from the US, I guess. We see you here. And Sexter, fantastic company using patient data here at the interface with big pharma. And you have a very special business model, right? I thought it was B2C to B. Maybe I'm wrong, but tell us a little bit about how you developed this business model and how did you go about it to engage Big Pharma in this model?
Great. Thank you so much, Frank, and the organizers at DayOne Basel area and conference for having me. I'm sorry I can't be in person, but I'm so glad to be virtually. Hopefully next year we'll be able to be in person. Yeah, look, I think what everyone has been talking about is just so inspiring for me because having had a lot of experience coming from the clinical diagnostic side and DNA sequencing side for about a decade and a half, working with pharma, quickly realized that breaking down data silos was of importance. And so this is when we founded Seekster in January of 2016. Little Seekster is turning 6 years old, and we quickly, pivoted to focusing on innovation for pharma right out of the gates. And how that happened was we started out with, an idea that if you put the person, the patient, at the center of their healthcare, you can disrupt all their electronic health record data, medical data, their genomic DNA profiling data, as well as their wearable biosensor medical device data, not limited to now. We can bring in, pharmacy data, claims data, social determinants of health data in a longitudinal health record in real time. That's what essentially Seekster does. But we did this, Frank, and everyone on the panel here, so differently, and it was kind of out of luck, I think you could say. A lot of startups and business folks start off with a business idea and a business plan. We did not have a business plan. We focused purely on the patient. And, I'm a geneticist by training, so I had some experience with family of history of data. Both my grandparents passed away due to Alzheimer's disease. My mom's a breast cancer survivor. My dad is a colon cancer survivor. I've had every single genome test that you can think of on the market. And I have a deep understanding of how to connect the dots from the patient to the enterprise. And we started off with, tens of thousands of patients telling us, Frank, how to build a patient relationship management system. Now, pharma got involved because Takeda decided to be an investor in Seekster. They had 300 plus ideas out of their, Hatch division, and their number one idea was a patient engagement, tool. When they found Seekster, they thought, instead of building it, let's just partner with Seekster and see if we can, expand on it. And so this is how we went from jumping from B to C to B to B to C by creating, a web SDK, an iOS and Android SDK, a white label for pharma. Now, what's interesting is there's been 24 different distinct use cases, from rare disease, from what Belinda was mentioning early on, to oncology, to autoimmune, to Alzheimer's, obviously, to neurodegenerative diseases, to patient services, to eliminating HCP letters, saving tremendous amount of costs for pharma, both on the development side as well as on the deployment side. And our experience with pharma has just been wonderful. We're working with 3 out of the top 10 pharma companies in the world now. And pharma has built our platform with our patients, with our innovators, with our physicians, with my team. And this is where it's, I think, the cusp of healthcare technology and pharma really delivering on interoperability. We pioneered patient-centric interoperability, but without pharma, there would be no use cases. I give pharma and all the great people at the DayOne Conference that are in the crowd that I know, probably several folks from presenting last time when I was at Basel in 2018, all the credit, because your innovation and your minds have allowed our technology to save lives. And I really, truly believe that health data is medicine. And pharma is understanding this on a whole nother level. You know, being the quarterback of Seekster, I get to have a really wide angle view and see so many different things from the innovation side, from the entrepreneurship side. And I think what's forgotten is within pharma, there are so many incredible, as you see here, different panelists that are entrepreneurs themselves. They're patients themselves. They're caregivers themselves. Forget about being a pharma exec or a CEO of a hot startup. Put that aside. At the end of the day, we are all patients and caregivers at some point, and we want some sort of technology to advance medicine. And so if you do it for the patient, the enterprise part becomes even easier. I think the old business model of just focusing on enterprise and forgetting about the patient is changing. And patient centricity is, you know, front and center. And we couldn't be more excited for Seekster to be a solution for, you know, patients, enterprises, pharma, payers, providers, and so forth. Because I think it starts with pharma, but it is, you know, in so many different use cases, going past and beyond pharma.
Thank you, Ardi. And with this proposition focused on patients, where you could then engage the pharma to co-develop that with you. I want to use the time to have my friend Eider talk here, one of the most knowledgeable person I know in the field of digital health. And this perspective of investability of companies who work at the interface with pharma. This is something I would like to hear your perspective on.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I mean, it's a fantastic moment to be in the healthcare industry. As you can see, if you remember how complicated it was 15 years ago to send money to someone across the world, right? Look 15 years forward, now you became a bank yourself with cryptocurrencies. Are we there yet in pharma and healthcare? No, but we are at the beginning of that realization. You asked a good question. I think we need to be careful because we have a responsibility. I will speak from an industry perspective as a pharma company leading, you know, innovation or digital transformation. I think we need to be careful of building the right condition for that ecosystem, especially not trying to replicate models that will be hard to scale. We will not do in Switzerland or in Europe what works well in Silicon Valley. We need to recreate a different model. And I think that will take us a bit of time to settle as an industry what will be the great conditions to connect with that ecosystem of external innovators. It's better, it's getting better. We are creating the vehicle to build value or capture value. You hear a lot about innovation lab. We are in Novartis, right? So my friend at the Biome will recognize themselves. But there will be also a corporate venture firms, you know, that will be created, collaboration with ecosystem builders like yourself. So I think it's getting there. But we have also a responsibility to create, as an industry, the right condition for building the talents that will fuel those ecosystems. It's not right to just expect that everything will be built elsewhere. We need to create a condition for that. Now, from a capital risk perspective, if I look at the other side, that industry has also a huge responsibility. They are fueling money into the ecosystem, and we need to do it with in mind the picture of what that ecosystem will look like. We cannot replicate hyper-growth companies like in the US or like in China. We need to be careful of creating the right ecosystem, the right financial ecosystem. I'm thinking valuation, ratios, right? So what good looks like, and is your valuation just based on tangibles, on your tech? What does it mean if you are licensing a sandwich of technologies? Is it based on growth? But then as a VC, are you okay to just inject money to give it to growth driver like, programmatic buying platforms and commercial growth through, Facebook ads, Google ads, and so on? That's not easy to understand right? If you are building growth through those platforms. So I think at the end of the day, what I see is that there is maturity happening, agility happening. I think it will settle down like it has in the fintech industry. I think we will see new players coming up. But it is an exciting time to see pharma companies and our leaders in the pharma companies calling for disruption, finally. Not iterative innovation, disruption, disruptive innovation. They want to be smashed with great ideas, right? Not just something we knew will happen in 5-10 years. We want to be amazed, and I think that's where we are right now.
Thank you very much, Heider. Thank you very much. So we are at the end of this panel discussion. I think we had many great things that will be part of this playbook we might write about this collaboration. We talked about shared vision. We talked about trust. We talked about customer focus, not too much about tech, but about customers. We talked about roadmaps, building projects together to be at the right speed between startups and pharma companies. We talked about interesting business models where the patient, of course, will be at the center that can be built at the interface with pharma. And we talked also about how you can build these different relationships across the ecosystem, and then also about, I think that's important, the responsibility also we have as we are accelerating these startups at the interface with an industry that is really now purely, that has really told that we are going to disrupt what we do, and there is a lot of innovation that is going to happen. Voilà, thank you very much. As Basel Area and DayOne, we will continue this discussion about writing a playbook. So if you guys are interested in participating, you can contact Lucas at any time. We'll provide a platform to develop this over the next months. And I would like to thank the panelists for coming here for this great discussion, and also to the audience for not having any questions. We didn't have the time at this stage, but we will respond to all of your questions that have been captured in the chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, wow, I have this incredible task and honor, I have to say, to welcome David Rowan, the founder of Voyagers, which is really a community of investors in the field of climate and health tech. An incredible background, too long to read, angel investor, author of the No Bullshit Innovation book, and of course also the founder of, editor-in-chief of Wired UK. So a great speaker. We'll talk about the future of health, and I think with examples on how smaller companies can change the game. David, welcome.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I suffer from a painful clinical condition. I feel compelled quite regularly to give small amounts of money to startups. And, months or 1 or 2 years later, I feel intense pain right here. And so far, there's no pharmaceutical remedy apart from learning what the startups see that the incumbents don't see. And typically in investing, 9 out of 10 of them don't work, but the 1 out of 10 that does work can really make a difference. So I am not an expert in the pharmaceutical world. I'm a recovering editor, a journalist who spends a lot of time with startups. And I think I know what's going on, but I'm constantly surprised by how fast things are moving. So one of the things I'm really obsessed with is kind of waking everybody else up to the speed of change. So this is one of Elon Musk's many projects. It's a new kind of user interface, the brain-computer interface. This monkey has a probe directly entering the brain, so you can read the thoughts, convert them into actions in the game of Pong. No keyboard, no mouse allowed. And this technology has all sorts of other applications, including clinical applications. Once you can start to understand the electrical signaling, you can then solve problems for people who can't move their bodies or speak. So if you've got like half a dozen things happening at the moment, the first of them is we are going to have to rethink the way we talk to the network because this tech is coming. And then artificial intelligence is coming so fast that it's allowing us to do stuff that is a bit bizarre.
I'm going to show you some magic. It's the real thing. I mean, it's all the real thing.
Except that is not the real thing. That is not Tom Cruise. That is somebody on TikTok using deepfake technology to make himself look like Tom Cruise and act like Tom Cruise. So we can now simulate real actors who have nothing to do with this. So we're now entering a new world where you can't really tell what reality is because we're so good at synthesizing. And then just think of your experience with your physician or your experience with customer service in any organization. Increasingly, the AI is getting used to recognizing your emotion, how you're feeling, and personalizing the response.
Hi, I'm Viola. I'm excited to show you the results of our game-changing research into humanizing AI. Autonomous animation enables digital people like me to take input from the environment and respond in real time. We've now significantly enhanced my ability to respond emotionally, give great eye contact, and react to my changing environment.
This is a New Zealand startup called Soul Machine, started by an award winner, an Academy Award winner in CGI, but then he decided how to replicate how the brain works, take the visual and audio input from a computer, and train the neural network to respond and customize the response. And they're working with hospital systems. They're also working with governments and financial services. So we're starting to get into a new world where personalization is actually literal to that person. It's how they're feeling at that moment. And just think of a few of the other things that are happening at the moment. I don't know if you are a gamer, but there are whole new ways of interacting, of creating economies, of creating entertainment in the games world. There was a concert in Fortnite. There were DJ sets in Fortnite. There were tens of millions of people engaging with this because it feels quite realistic when you're in that avatar version of yourself in the game. And so you heard of a guy called Zuckerberg last week talking about the metaverse. What is the metaverse going to be? Well, he's probably not worked it out. Nobody's worked it out yet, but what we know is when you can simulate thousands of people in the same place interacting, virtual reality, augmented reality, trade in digital assets, it's going to change the rules. And then those digital assets, what does that mean when artists can copy a JPEG but attach it to a blockchain and say this is worth $70 million? We have a whole new economy now that's decentralized, but it's not just art that can be sold for crypto money. We're now even able to create a non-Facebook version of Facebook because you don't need a central repository of authority in a decentralized world. So we're still kind of working out what that means. And then all the other stuff we know is happening, the speed of acceleration of robotics, companies like Boston Dynamics, whose only real purpose seems to be to put videos on YouTube showing how clever their robots are. It keeps getting bought and sold. Recently bought by Hyundai, having been bought and sold by Google. But it just shows you the complexity that's becoming more every day. The sensors, the computer vision that allows the robot to keep learning. And we just know this is going to be the expectation in every kind of factory scenario. So we're in a world where machines are getting smarter, and you can't really slow down and ignore it because you're not ready for it. It's there. It changes the expectation of the workers, the customers. And then there's, unexpected things that come along that we weren't really ready for, and, changes the nature of going for a cycle, changes what a church is. Your church is now a digital church, and your synagogue and your mosque, because even though the technology was there for years, they never innovated. But now they can reach people streaming. What is the workplace? The rules change. And you can't really relax and say, not ready for that. We're still doing our previous strategy plan that's got another 5 years to run. I'm very interested in exponential curves because if you catch the right bit of the curve, you can see there's about to be a huge market opportunity. This is one of my favorites from the lockdown period. The blue curve, the blue line is American dollars in circulation. The yellow curve is the value of all cryptocurrencies, which earlier this year overtook US dollars. That's going to mean something. And then what happens when very difficult science problems are solved by very complex teams of kind of highly educated machine learning people? So we don't know where this is going to lead to. We're starting to get little indications, but in healthcare, we're just at the beginning. Day one, as they say. It's going to be an era where we start to capture more data. We start to capture genomic data, sensor data. I'm really looking forward to the smart toilet that tells me how I need to modify my behavior and diet. But you need to keep learning, the new language. So all these things are going to affect healthcare, but everything else in some way. I don't know if this is how you will be interacting with your doctor or your colleagues. This is Oculus, that's now part of a company called Meta. But the tech is out there, and tech tends to be commodified quite quickly. And it's not just tech that's changing quickly. It's teenagers deciding not to go to school on Friday are changing social attitudes. They're changing social behavior. They're creating an expectation from customers that you are going to change your manufacturing process, your supply chain process. Greta helped popularize another word, which in Swedish means flight shaming. Popular idea in Sweden. It led, even before the lockdowns, to a fall in passenger numbers from Stockholm's airport. So what, meanwhile, is happening in healthcare because of the rapid acceleration? Well, I'm just going to give you some examples of some of the companies that became unicorns, billion-dollar companies in the lockdown months and years. And I'll give you 4 of them where I have a kind of an interesting connection. So this is Kate from a company called Maven Clinic that started out as a way of allowing women in particular, women who had become pregnant or had just given birth, to talk to their doctor. But they found it worked, particularly as a workplace benefit, and it's now huge in the US. It raised money at more than $1 billion valuation just a few months ago. And this is Kyle, is in San Francisco. He used to have a personal issue with depression, and he got frustrated that if you need treatment for mental health, if you need a therapist, if you need medication, you don't get it straight away. You have to wait. And so he started a startup at the beginning of last year called Cerebral, which was designed for the patient's needs. It was designed, if you sign up, you get treatment within hours. If you need medication, you get a delivery within a couple of days. And you know what? Lockdowns are not great for people's mental health. And come March, suddenly demand goes like this. So they launched at the start of last year. At the moment, this team at Cerebral has an annual run rate of $175 million. It's being valued in the multi-billions. And then this is Hemont, who's an investor, a VC in California, who started a company that's also recently been formally recognized as a unicorn. It's called Commure, and it's reinventing the software for hospitals to interface between what's happening with the patient, what the clinicians know, because that is a particularly clunky and broken and monopoly-led system. And of course, software changes people's likelihood to avoid secondary implications of whatever they're in the hospital for. And then the fourth is Johannes from a company called Cree, which is a Swedish company that then went into Norway and the UK and France and I think Germany as a very effective interface for patients to communicate with the medics, and very competitive space, highly regulated in each territory, but they persevered because they have this entrepreneurial hunger. And I'll tell you why I'm giving these four examples. So Johannes I met last week, and I interviewed him and tried to understand how he managed to scale in a very difficult sector. But the other three, bizarrely, were people I met at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, put a little bit of investment money in, and have kind of been part of that. And it's kind of woken me up to the massive power of the startups to build the next incumbents very, very quickly, but also for us to learn how they think. So my background is much more conventional. I have always been a journalist. I ran Wired in the UK, which is a magazine that tries to understand where the future's going by talking to not just the technologists and scientists, but the architects, the designers, the people creating new culture, new business model. And I got really obsessed with how real innovation happens, how the startup people think and ignore the rules. They just see a problem, the best ones obsessively try and solve it. And so I kind of design my time now around trying to spend as much time with the startup people as possible, but also trying to bridge the gaps between them. And I've set up this kind of not-for-profit side project intending to bring together people in health tech and also people in climate tech for peer support. It's really difficult trying to build a new kind of cancer diagnostics business or to build a new kind of sensor that you wear that collects data from the body. It's not just the physical and the hardware and the software challenges, but there's the regulatory challenges, there's the building a company culture challenge, there's the getting funded challenge. So this side project I have, which is called Voyagers, we try and make people start to trust each other, start to help each other, online plus offline. Lucas was part of a trip we did to Spain just a month ago. 3 days, 50 people in health tech, and amazing things come out of the conversations, the storytelling. So I'm kind of all over the place. But this obsession with trying to understand real innovation and seeing a gap between how a lot of conventional organizations are kind of slowly realizing that things are happening much more quickly, led me to write a book which has a rude word in the title, because I saw a lot of bullshit innovation. Every big organization that has, a head of innovation, but was not actually doing anything to challenge how you're making money quarter by quarter. Yet all this tech stuff was happening at a super accelerated rate. And often innovation in a big successful organization is, ticking the box. It's the theater of innovation. Whereas in the real world, you can pretend for a bit. You could be Wile E. Coyote being chased by a roadrunner off the cliff. You can keep going for a bit, but eventually gravity takes over. So what am I seeing in the healthcare startups? What am I learning from my own painful mistakes? So the first thing, the really effective startups bring together people from hybrid mindsets. My favorite building in London is the Crick Institute, the biggest biomedical research center in Europe, funded by the universities, the Wellcome Trust, to try and solve genomic illness, cancer, all sorts of things. But what's brilliant about the Crick is they've designed the physical space to enable collisions. There's no real walls on the inside. The idea is the genomics expert will run into the data informatics expert, will run into the computer visualization expert, and they'll kind of take on a problem and challenge each other. And I think when you bring different mindsets together to try and solve problems. That's where it gets really exciting. So one of the things we've done at Voyagers, because we've got 300 people in the health tech group, is we've tried an experiment. Why don't people in the group pull together a bit of money to invest in other people in the group? So everybody's kind of working together. It's part of the trust building. And I'll just give you an example of one of the companies in the group, which is using the fruit fly to try and personalize cancer treatments for patients with quite difficult to treat cancers. The company is called Vivan Therapeutics. It takes IP developed in Mount Sinai, but it's hugely complex, and it's only the crazy stuff that a startup could do. They sequence the patient and the patient's tumor. They genetically modify 500,000 fruit flies to manifest those mutations, and then they feed them combinations of a couple of thousand licensed drugs to see which combination allows these fruit flies to live the longest, and then they give the report to the oncologist, which sounds like a lot of work. Eventually you'll get enough data you can do a computer simulation. But, you know, why shouldn't we use simulations, as Vivan says? We do it to make the airplanes fly more safely. It's a new and quite crazy, but quite exciting way of thinking about diagnostics. And there are, you know, many patients who have had life-extending treatments because of the data they got. This is another company in our community that we've kind of pulled an investment in. It's quite stealth, but they're making new kinds of monitors for what's happening in your blood, but non-invasive monitors. And it's a kind of bioelectronics experts meeting with hematology specialists, meeting with hardware specialists. And because there's a team of people who think differently, they're coming together, collaborating, and pow, that's how a new way of solving a problem comes. And if you think about what happened during the early days of COVID, people were collaborating in hybrid groups. There were a whole bunch of international hackathons being guided by Slack channels and Facebook groups. There were a whole bunch of open ventilator building projects. There weren't enough ventilators. People came together remotely with no central direction, and there were a bunch of attempts to solve this. There were decentralized ways to try and understand the structure of the COVID virus. At one stage in May last year, there were so many people who lent their computer processing power to folding at home that it became the world's biggest supercomputer. And that was all these people connecting their computers. So the second thing I see the startups doing is they're really using the AI as it advances. And this is just an example of a bunch of companies, investors, corporations using AI for drug discovery. But that's just like the obvious use cases. There's all sorts of ways that people in startups are using machine learning. This is a company I've just been talking to today. There's no limits. You can create simulations. You can create experiments using data. And we have the processing power, we have the cloud, we have the software experts who can take on what was a clinical lab problem and turn it into a data problem. The best companies in the startup world in health tech, I also think, get hyper ambitious from the beginning. And one of the things I think I notice among the people who tend to make it through to the next level are they're so obsessed with a problem because they see it as such a big problem. It's not like a choice for them. It's like a passion, an obsession. And this is one of the companies in our community that's a couple of PhDs who are developing new kind of mutation-proof vaccines. And, they're in their mid-20s, but they're growing and they're starting to get funding and they're starting to get serious interest because they're solving, or at least trying to solve, one of the big problems. And they're doing it their own way, and maybe it won't work, but if it does work, boy, it's going to be exciting. they also are realistic, and they don't, much as entrepreneurs like breaking the rules, they break the rules but try and get the regulators to break the rules with them. So I've been doing some work with the emerging world of regulated psychedelics. I've been talking to people like George and Katya, the founders of Compass Pathways, which is, I think, the best funded company at the moment doing clinical trials for psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And it's pretty clear that over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a transformation in the number of psychedelic-related therapeutic treatments on the market. And yet, this was a taboo only a couple of years ago. And, we're not talking about legalizing the recreational use of these substances. We're talking about clinical research that shows that they're effective at treatment-resistant depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress. But the regulators know that we need fresh approaches to this booming crisis in mental health. People like George and Katya and a whole bunch of other companies are working with the regulators, doing the proper clinical trials, raising quite a lot of money to do that. And, there's never certainty with clinical trials, but there is an overall wave which does say we're going to get treatments coming to market maybe in as little as 2 or 3 years. And this is like a huge economic opportunity, but also a way of solving a lot of people's problems. Another thing I see with a lot of these companies is they think like they're building apps in order to solve healthcare problems. And I'll just give you an idea of another startup in our group. This is a company run by a couple of young founders that are taking a licensed medication for treating obesity, but adding behavior change in an app-based program. So it's not simply taking the product, it's understanding how the patient will engage, will get hooked on a process to ensure there is a result. And I see a whole bunch of these companies. There's another company, Kranas Health, in our group that's got an app-based way of helping tackle erectile dysfunction by giving you all sorts of exercises. And the best of the founders work with people who understand the best of the consumer apps. So there's a game, there's a brain training game that has been used millions of times. It's called Peak, and I think it's been downloaded 40 or 50 million times. You may have played it. The founders have now taken that expertise to try and find new ways to diagnose Alzheimer's and cognitive decline at an early stage. This is their company, and they are using game dynamics to measure how fast, how effectively people solve all sorts of problems. And they're taking a clinical approach. They're doing trials. There's another company I spoke to last week. Again, it's not a pharma company. It's a young guy in Sweden who's just got into Y Combinator, and he's using a crowd of people with psoriasis and eczema to try and design new products that they will like. Not making medical claims, but saying it relieves the pain. So we've got all this happening. We've got companies coming from nowhere to be very valuable. We also have a deep respect for science, and I don't think there's going to be a transformation unless it starts with a lab, which creates interesting challenges and dilemmas. I'm working at the moment with this fine gentleman who's Professor George Hanna, who runs the oncology department at Imperial College in London, who has done an awful lot of work on breath as a way of diagnosing early-stage upper GI tract cancers. And he's been published in all the best journals. He's pretty advanced in his clinical trials. through the community, we're trying to find the right people with business backgrounds, with this hybrid, diverse thinking, to get this to market as soon as possible, because it's going to save lives, it's going to save health services an awful lot of money. But it starts with the deep science. Then you need the hybrid team around it. Or, this is Nusrat, who's in India, who's in our community, who in her lab in India has found ways to send molecules through the cell membrane with an implication that you could target chemotherapy directly into the cells you need to target and not damage the neighboring cells. Again, young startups, but with huge ambitions. And increasingly, startups using data to solve problems in powerful ways. I just went to the Web Summit in Lisbon and interviewed Alison Schmidt, who's an Olympic 10-time medalist for the United States, a swimmer. And she's now working with a startup called Oreco that tracks the body's output, not just blood, but sleep patterns, all sorts of other things. And for a woman, tracks the hormonal cycle, because for elite athletes, that makes a huge difference. Why shouldn't that be available to everybody else? So the context is things are moving fast. This was 1956, uploading 5 megs of storage to the cloud, literally to the cloud. But look what happens with those exponential curves. The price comes right down. So I'm going to save you the trouble of reading my book. I'm going to give you like a 4-minute summary of what I learned about what real innovation is. And it comes down to 5 words beginning with P. Empower the people at every level of the organization to suggest the new approaches. Define a purpose that's bigger than the quarterly projected revenue. Come up with processes that allow you to try things in very efficient ways. Protect the people doing things in new ways, and have an arm of the company that's just experimenting and preparing. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. Allow the people who are motivated to do the stuff they think is cool. Eric Yuan, Chinese-born, after 17 visa attempts, got to work in California, worked for a company called WebEx that was doing video conferencing, but everybody hated it. It was flaky. He went to the bosses a bunch of times and said, I want to improve it. The company was bought by Cisco. It wasn't a priority. They said no. He left, started a company called Zoom, which earlier this year almost had a similar market cap to Cisco. Let the talent do stuff. A games company in Helsinki, Supercell, that makes games like this. That's the boss. He wants to be the least powerful CEO in the world because he knows it's about recruiting talented people and letting them decide how they work. And I see, pharma companies that see the power in the people. It's a really healthy attitude. Purpose means not simply thinking about how you're making money, but actually why we're here, why we exist. This is a Peruvian entrepreneur I met who runs the biggest conglomerate in Peru called Intercorp, which has banks and supermarkets and hotels. It's about 4% of the GDP of Peru. And they couldn't hire good enough people because the education system's broken in Peru. There's political corruption. So they decided their purpose was to improve Peru, not simply make money out of the bank and the supermarkets and the pharmacies. They started a school system, slightly for profit, but cheap enough for the lower middle class, which is getting twice the results of the national attainment tests. It's now 50 or 60 schools. And now on the homepage, they define their purpose, to make Peru the best place to bring up a family. Process can mean build an ecosystem around yourself with the startups. The head of a big tech company in China, Xiaomi, that makes very high quality but very cheap handsets. Some people say they may copy Apple in various things, such as their stores. But they make the best-selling air purifier in China, the best-selling battery pack, but they don't literally make it. They work with 400 or 500 startups that they've put a tiny bit of investment money into, and they give the startups access to their hundreds of millions of customers, but they get the branding on there. And I asked the team that makes these investment decisions why, as a manufacturing company, you don't make it. And they said, well, the startups have to survive on the streets every day by knowing what the customer wants. We couldn't do that. We have an ecosystem approach. We put him on the cover of Wired saying it's time to copy China. at Google X, where they make self-driving cars. They're obsessed with process, cognitive diversity, a hybrid team on every project, and psychological safety, which means you can propose anything and nobody will laugh at you. Kathy Hannon was working as, I think, the youngest person there in marketing. She came up with the proposal, what if you could take seawater, take the carbon and hydrogen out, create a new carbon neutral fuel? They didn't laugh. They gave her 2 years' worth of money and team, and they did it. It was more expensive than it was going to be, but that's how you innovate. And I guess finally, the people doing the new stuff, protect them. I went to the Pentagon for my research, where 3 million people work for the US Department of Defense. It's a gigantic bureaucracy. They hired this guy from startup land who swears a lot. He wears hoodies that say things like hack the Pentagon. His name's Chris Lynch. And they said, build a team of 30 people who can just hack the bureaucracy and get stuff done. But here's a letter you can have in your pocket from the Secretary of Defense that says, we want you to get away with it. He takes the letter out when people get in his way. And I guess lastly, look around the corner. Stanley Cheng became a billionaire selling saucepans. You probably own one of his saucepans. His son, Vincent, in his 30s, says, Dad, you know, the internet's coming for the kitchen. What do we do? Stanley says, I don't know, but here's some money to research. The son, Vincent, sets up a startup in a converted barn in Silicon Valley, in the Napa Valley, the wine country, hires a bunch of Michelin-starred chefs, designs a new kind of frying pan that has a temperature sensor embedded in the metal, sits on a conductive heater, connects to an app which is packed with recipes of the Michelin-starred chef's cooking, and you can cook alongside with them. So essentially, like Netflix, you'll download a bunch of recipes each month, you'll pay a subscription, and you'll be as good as the Michelin-starred chefs. I said, Stanley, how big do you think this is going to be for the company? He said, I don't know, but if we don't play, we'll be zero, because our rivals are playing. So I will leave you with human nature, which is to resist this fast change because it feels uncomfortable. The first time you are in the completely autonomous car, it's going to be uncomfortable. So this is Bill Rimmer puts his mum in his Tesla, switches on to autonomous mode. But you know what? Like a couple of weeks later, she'll just be using it to go and play bridge with her friends. Don't be scared of the tech. Adopt it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David Rowan. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to welcome you. To thank you very much, and I'll let you leave the stage, and then I'll make the final closing. Thank you very much. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it is unfortunately that time of the day, and it is unfortunately up to me to close the 5th annual DayOne Conference this year. But before I do that, I do just want to say an enormous thank you to all of our incredible speakers and all of our audience today, everyone that dialed in from over 25 different countries. Thank you so much for your trust, and thank you so much for your support. I'm going to do this slightly backwards because what usually happens is that somebody gives the closing and then we do a thank you to all of the tech and staff that are involved. But I'm going to do it slightly differently. And first, before anything else, I'd like to say an enormous thank you to Leah, who is our technical support, who provided everything today. Thank you very much, Leah. You did a really incredible job. And to the rest of the Basel area and DayOne team, thank you very much. You've been absolutely incredible. So we started the day this morning by hearing from Kasper Sutter about why Basel really was the logical place for healthcare's fourth industrial revolution. And we agree, right? The change, we believe, is starting here, and we are here for the long run. So this is just the beginning for the DayOne Conference. Next year, we want to be even bigger, and our ambition is to be the slush of digital health. But we can only do that with your support and with your collaboration, so watch this space. The second thing that we heard this morning were the grand challenges that we face in healthcare. So we heard from Angela how COVID accelerated the breaking down of barriers that healthcare was facing. And then we heard from Thomas Müller about the 8.2 billion franc digital health opportunity in Switzerland. Finally, for the morning session, we heard from Sarah some of the mega trends that are taking place in healthcare, and some of those really amazing opportunities that Europe actually is innovating faster than anybody else, but there are just some things that we have to do to get over the challenges that we face. Secondly, we had the enormous privilege of hearing from our patient champions, and it really is an enormous privilege to have their engagement in our work. I'd like to thank Steve again, once again for his engagement, and all of our patient champions for contributing to the work. In the afternoon, we had an opportunity to proactively work together to find solutions to those challenges that those patients had brought together. And that really was an incredible experience. So thank you very much for all of our breakout leads and for all of the contributions from the audience. And then this afternoon, the panel of leaders from industry and entrepreneurs talking about how startups and pharma can work together. What we know and what we've learned is that the playbook is still being written, and it's all to play for. And it really is up to us to do it. So we invite you to come along on that journey with us and to make that happen and to build a playbook for that in the future. Finally, we had an amazing keynote from David Rowan talking about the potential that the future holds and the pace of innovation and incredible technologies that are coming to bear, and how the key to success in innovation is to mobilize the 5 Ps, as he discussed. So finally, it leaves me with nothing else but to just say an enormous thank you once again to all of our contributors. And we look forward to working with you again in the future. And we'll see you next year at the DayOne Annual Conference in 2023. Thank you very much.